Thanks very much. My name's Jake Dubbins. I'm co-founder, along with Emma Tozer, of Media Bounty, and also co-founder and co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network with one of the speakers, Harriet Kingaby. Media Bounty is a B Corp creative and media agency. We're on a mission to become the leading ethical media and creative agency by 2026. We're also a sustainability consultancy as well, so we have deep expertise in the area of greenwashing, climate, sustainability consultancy, and communications. A few things that I guess we're up to at the moment. Harriet leads something called ACT Climate Labs, which is a project to deliver more effectiveness into climate communications and to reach beyond the climate bubble. We've recently been putting together a pan-European guide on greenwashing for Panasonic. Not a small task with thousands of product lines, so that's been taking up a lot of our time. And also we've been advising various UN departments on, or agencies, the high-level group on net zero emissions of non-state entities. It's always trips off the tongue, the UN language, and also a recent policy brief on information integrity on digital platforms. So the landscape on greenwashing and climate regulation is changing very, very quickly and is impacting all of our roles, all of our jobs, and how we communicate this in a pretty deep and structural way. There's the EU Green Claims Directive coming out. There is the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Bill that may actually be fining companies 10% of global revenue if consumer law is broken. That tends to wake up board members, fining 10% of global revenue. And then more UN materials coming out, both at the Climate Summit in September, but also next year with the Summit of the Future. We have Guy here from the ASA, CEO of the ASA, and you know, in a week where it has been reported that the UK is slipping on its leadership in climate, I would say that the ASA are global leaders in the advertising world on holding businesses and advertising to account on greenwashing claims, green claims in the UK, and that has ramifications for these businesses globally. HSBC ads were banned on omitting from the fact that they were investing in vast amounts of money in fossil fuel extraction projects. Recently, ads for Anglian Water were also banned because they neglected to inform people that they were also pumping sewage into the rivers, and also Shell for glossing over their fossil fuel investments as well. So that time of, you know, greenwashing is over. Also, the updates to the CAP and BCAP code, I think that's been launched this week in collaboration with the Competition and Markets Authority. So forget Cannes, the ASA is actually shaping the future of advertising, certainly in this country and globally. Now, why does it matter? Earlier this year, the IPCC came out with a statement that said we are facing a rapidly closing window to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. So, you know, that's quite a statement that we're facing. That's quite a crisis that we're all facing. So advertising has a great opportunity. You know, we are all storytellers. We've got a great opportunity here to actually, you know, tell stories in this world, but do it transparently, with radical transparency, with precision, but also with great creativity. You know, the brands and businesses in this room, those that you represent, have an awesome opportunity to do this properly, to do it right and be on the right side of history, but also add value to your brands and your business. But you also have a choice to be part of the solution or to propagate false solutions, which is obviously where the ASA are coming in very strongly. So that's enough for me. I'd like to intro our two speakers. Harriet Kingaby is the lead of ACT Climate Labs, which is a network of over 300 organizations. It runs advertising projects that proves effectiveness in climate communications, and also it has intelligence. It's a project of Media Bounty that we've been running over the last 2 to 3 years, and is wildly and terrifyingly successful. She is also the co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network, which is another organization of 180 members working to cut the economic link between advertising and the harmful content that divides us. but also including climate misinformation. And she is a sustainability and advertising legend. Guy from the ASA is the CEO of the ASA, in charge of all of their strategy, including the More Impact Online strategy. He's president of the International Council of Advertising Self-Regulation. He is a board member of the European Advertising Standards Alliance, as well as the fundraising regulator and a member of the fundraising regulator standards committee as well. So I don't think you could have two people with more expertise in a room talking about the current situation with communications, climate and greenwashing. So thanks very much. Over to these two wonderful people.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. We had a kind of pre-call before we, just to kind of plan the kind of questions that what we wanted to talk about, and it was the most fun I've had in a kind of pre-call for a while, so I'm hoping that we're going to entertain you today as well.
No pressure.
No pressure. So Guy, it's really, really fabulous to be here with you. Can you tell us a little bit about, kind of what is going on at the ASA and the CMA today? Because obviously, as Jake said, there have been all kind of landmark rulings over the last kind of year or so. What's the thinking behind this?
So we started a project on this a couple of years ago. We call it the Climate Change and Environment Project. And the genesis of this was obviously what's going on with the planet, and specifically Climate Change Committee publishing a report a few years ago that said that if we are going to meet our very challenging emission reduction targets, 78% by 2035, 100% by 2050 compared to 1990. If the UK is going to meet those, then there has to be wide-scale consumer behaviour change. And helpfully, they said where that needed to happen most. Energy, heating, transport, waste, and food. So they identified the kind of sectors stroke areas, because they're not all sectors, waste isn't really a sector, where people need to change their behaviour. Advertising has a kind of superpower at persuading people to change their behaviour. We want that to be used positively, not negatively. We've been regulating misleading green claims for decades, literally for decades. The rules that we've been administering haven't really changed. The rules that are in the codes now are as near as damn it identical to the ones that we, I think, first launched whenever it was, the 1980s, I think it was. But obviously the issues have changed, and the importance of this issue has changed a lot. And so the project has kind of sliced up these sector stroke issues, and we've tackled them in phases. We've done public research to guide us, to inform us. Is that better? Yeah. Could you hear me before? Do you want me to start again? We've done big public research to help us, for example, on things like carbon neutral and net zero when used in ads. And our research, like a lot of other research, has found that people are really confused about those terms. They typically assume that means that the business is meaningfully reducing their emissions, when told that for some businesses the claim is predicated on them offsetting pretty well all their emissions. They don't like it, they feel like that's misleading. So that's been really interesting. Public research into claims made for e-vehicles and hybrid vehicles. We're running more research at the moment in the areas of waste and heating. And the way we're trying to do this is to do the public research to inform the next phase that we're looking into. But there are lots of other tools that we're using too. We're running investigations that result in rulings, and Jake name-checked a few recent high-profile ones. Most of those result from people complaining to us. Some of them, like one that we published against Lufthansa a month or two ago, was an own initiative ASA investigation. We used data science to do a sweep of claims being made by airlines a few months ago, and we identified some claims that we thought looked dodgy, and we investigated them, and we published a couple of rulings on the back of that, but also publishing guidance. So we haven't updated our codes, but we have updated our guidance last week. Read it. If you haven't already, read it, because it's really up to date, and it pretty well captures everything that we've been doing in the last few years, particularly in the last year. It ties in with the CMA's own guidance, which they published, I think, in late 2021, and we obviously worked very closely with them when they were producing that guidance to make sure that it was consistent with our various positions in this area. I feel like I've drifted from your question, but anyway, that's a kind of snapshot of all that we're doing in this area at the moment, and why.
Fantastic. I mean, it's great to hear that there's so much work going on. Last year we published a piece of research around a group we call the Persuadables. So this is for anyone who's not seen it, this is the 69% of people who are neither climate activists nor climate deniers. And what we found really echoed that. We found that people were confused. We found that actually a lot of green communications are made in ways which just don't reach this group. And those kind of vague claims, something being eco-friendly, for example, or carbon neutral. Like, I've worked in sustainability communications for 15 years, and to be honest with you, like, if you got me to explain carbon neutral, you could pick holes in it. So what we've got is a group of people who feel confused and who actually don't trust these claims. So it's brilliant to hear that you're doing such brilliant work. I guess a big part of what I've seen is that the new guidance places a lot of emphasis on things like substantiation, and a lot of emphasis on things like precision within these claims. When we've got this big group of people who feel very confused, how is this really going to kind of help them and bring them in?
I think just by providing better information. The reason we published a ruling against HSBC last October. They ran a campaign that focused on their greener investments, and it was a typical sustainability campaign. Sort of drone images of waves crashing on an empty, pristine beach, that sort of stuff. And they were talking about how they're contributing to saving the planet. And we received complaints, including from a campaigning group called Ad Free Cities, which complains to us a lot about stuff. We don't always agree with them, but we sometimes do. They're quite hot in this area. That this was misleading by omission. Not because what they were saying in the ads was not substantiated, was misleading, but because of what they weren't saying. And what they weren't saying was that they still invest an awful lot of money in oil and gas extraction. I mean, a lot of money. And these greener initiatives that they were talking about in the campaign are a bit of a drop in the ocean compared to their investments in oil and gas extraction. So we investigated, we published this ruling. This principle of misleading by omission is not new. That's not something we've invented in the context of this project that we're 2 years into on climate change and the environment. It's been a part of, an established part of consumer law for a long time. It's written into UK law. It's mentioned explicitly in the CMA's guidance that they published in 2021. It's explicitly mentioned in our codes and has been for decades. But we did take it a step further than anyone else, I think, in the world had taken it at that point. And we said that they needed to include balance in campaigns like this in future. They needed to nod to the fact that that a lot of their activity, the vast majority of their activity, isn't so good when judged by sustainability criteria. And there are other businesses that are doing this. I mean, there are big businesses in very high emission sectors that have done this before we got involved. What we're asking is not impossible. And one of the things that bugs me, and you'll know this from the prep call we had the other day, I won't use the same language, but one of the things that bugs me is there's a bit of a narrative developing that because the ASA is being so strict cracking down on greenwashing. It's basically saying that if you're a high emission emitting business, or you're operating in a sector that's high emitting, then you can't advertise your greener initiatives. And it's just not true. You can, you just have to add balance to those campaigns, because consumers are pretty confused. They don't know, even when they know that a big energy company extracts oil and gas and sells petrol, even when they know that, they don't know how far along the decarbonisation pathway that business is. And you know, these campaigns that these sort of businesses run typically make quite big claims. They talk it up because that's what advertising does. It's advocacy, right? And that's okay normally. But on this issue, at this current time, with the state of the planet as it is, there is now a requirement to add balance to those sorts of ads. That balance doesn't have to dominate the ad, but it has to be there. It can't be hidden. Don't hide it away in the small print. Nod to the other side of the story when you're doing the storytelling about the greener initiatives. There's a question.
This is probably a horribly creative, mean thing to ask you right now.
Don't ask it then.
I'm absolutely not backing HSBC. But, so we have a problem where it's so right, you're saying 69% of consumers are confused, and you've got to give them a message, basically one message. If they're walking past an ad and they've got 1 second to digest something, giving that balance is pretty hard, right? Like being able to tell two sides of a story in 1 second where someone's going to take it in very, very quickly. Do you have obviously not able to provide them right now, but is there a good example of a company who've been able to do that balance thing really well that we can look at? And it's not like, and by the way, we also do X, Y, Z, blah, 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 and then you've lost the consumer and goodbye, they're confused again. Yeah,
I mean, you don't have to provide this balance necessarily when you're capturing their attention. I mean, we are making an assumption that people will read the ad or will view the ad, not just the first few seconds of a 30-second ad. They won't just read the headline of a poster or a print ad. We assume that you've caught the attention of the consumer and they're actually engaging with your advertising. They need to notice the balance. There's a good example of a business that did it right. BP ran a campaign a year or two ago where they were focusing on, I think this was in the lead up to COP26. They were focusing on their investments in hydrogen and carbon capture, and also their investments in the UK. So there were a couple of messages they were trying to get across. The ad that we noticed, we didn't investigate it, by the way, so there is not a formal ASA decision on this. What you're hearing is the perspective of me and my team. Aim off for that. But the ad was good because in the body copy, it wasn't a particularly dense ad. It featured, on the left-hand side, it featured some icons of things like, it was like little sort of line drawings that signified hydrogen, carbon capture, and wind turbines. The top one was an oil rig. The top one, top left, most prominent position, I think, if your eyes running down that list of icons on the left-hand side, the top one was basically signifying oil and gas extraction. Good old-fashioned oil and gas extraction. The body copy talked, relatively briefly about, in a paragraph or two, about, did I say this was a press ad? This was a press ad. Relatively briefly about these investments that they're making into hydrogen and carbon capture. And then they had a equally prominent paragraph on its own, so it did kind of stand out. It certainly wasn't less prominent than the rest of the body copy. Arguably, it was a little bit more prominent. There was a line that said, although most of our activity today is oil and gas extraction, we are da-da-da-da-da-da-da. This is a good example of adding balance and nodding to the other side of the story. It's not impossible. It does require you to kind of engage brain and think about how you're going to do this, because the point you make is really important. You have a limited amount of opportunity really to capture people's attention, but it is not impossible. So at the moment there's a bit of a narrative developing that it's either greenwashing or green hushing, and that's just way too binary a way of looking at it. It just isn't. There's a lot of space in the middle to play in.
And that's really important, I think, because you know, there is space between hyperbole and, you know, kind of getting overly rational or doing this kind of stuff, because I think what we see sometimes is people approach this topic and they kind of forget a little bit about their marketing hat, and they forget a little bit about thinking about their audience and who they're talking to, and, you know, trying to make things really compelling for that audience as well. And I guess that's the balance that also has to be struck as well. You're kind of making these claims because people want to hear them, because they will kind of build your brand in some way, and it's also making sure that you add that element in and that marketing expertise when we're kind of building this stuff. And
there's probably there are probably quite important differences in why businesses are making environmental claims. So if you've got a challenger brand that is, you know, better for the environment than competitors on the market, or, you know, better than your previous product, you know, you're trying to sell that message to consumers because you want them to buy your product. If you're a business like BP that ran this campaign that I'm talking about, I don't think you're trying to sell petrol, right? That's more of an ESG thing. I think. So there, the kind of, arguably the storytelling and engaging with the persuadables, what are the 67, 69, whatever it is, isn't so important, because that's not really the purpose of the campaign. But in both cases, precision, clarity, substantiation, and, you know, thinking about whether this campaign is one of those campaigns where you're going to have to nod to the other side because you're a high carbon emitting business or operating in a sector like that. Those are all really important.
And actually, there's a danger when we think about this stuff that we just talk about the edge cases, that we just talk about the high carbon industries, we just, you know, and you know, the fossil fuel financing. But the ASA has also made some recent rulings around, you know, around kind of ethical brands such as Alpro and such as Innocent. Can you talk to us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I mean, they were just overclaiming. Yeah. So they were just making claims that the evidence couldn't support. I don't know whether what I'm going to say relates to those two examples or to other similar cases, but, you know, there was an example of 100% recycling for a bottle, and it wasn't. I think the bottle top wasn't recyclable, or the other way around. Anyway, it wasn't 100% recycling. I mean, it's just like, you know, don't say it if it's not true. It's not. I mean, that was, you know, that was not a complicated case, I don't think. There was one about packaging for a food delivery company where, again, they talked about 100% recycling, but it was just the cardboard box. It wasn't all the stuff they stuck in it to keep the food from going off when it's sat outside your front door waiting for you to come home. So again, really quite straightforward, but we felt quite bad because for quite a while, most of our rulings were about businesses that you know, they were kind of quite cool businesses trying to do the right thing, and because they were operating in that environmental claim space, they were the ones that were making mistakes because they were overdoing it. And so we had for a while a series of rulings against the likes of Innocent and Alpro, and not against businesses in very high carbon emitting sectors, and it felt a bit odd. But it does make the point that, you know, it doesn't matter what sort of business you are, you have to get this right. I mean, you really have to get this right, and the best way of making sure you do that is to read our guidance that we launched last week. But also we offer a copy advice service. We have done for decades, where you can send in your ad in production or your claim or just, you know, your idea. You can send it to them online, and they will get back to you with advice within 24 hours, and it's free. So and they're really good on this subject. They are all over it. I mean, they wrote most of the guidance. They're all over it. So, you know, use copy advice would be my advice. That was going to be your last question, I know, because I've seen the questions that Harriet. I've just answered her last question.
It's all right, I've got more. Well, that's brilliant, and I think that's a kind of really nice way of segueing into the opportunity here, because, you know, these are fine. I think some of these kind of rulings and this guidance is probably keeping a few people in this room up at night. But it does feel like there's a huge opportunity here. So, for example, when we were doing our research, what we were finding is a lot of these green, these kind of nebulous green terms don't resonate with people. And that actually we do need to rethink the way that we communicate with the vast swathe of ordinary human beings who are just trying to live their lives, but who are concerned about this. And I just feel like actually with this guidance, we've got the guardrails, we've got some of the rules in place that we can start to use to actually rethink this. We were talking about imagery on our pre-call, talking about this kind of big nebulous kind of green imagery, and I was saying I was absolutely notorious in a previous agency for in creative briefs having a kind of bingo card where I was like, I don't want to see any of these in the creative, and it was things like the kind of recycling symbol as a piece of clip art and a polar bear and kind of lush green things when actually the product itself isn't that green, that kind of stuff. So it just feels like actually with this guidance what we're doing is we're pushing things along and we're starting conversations that need to be had about how we can actually genuinely reach more people and genuinely kind of think differently in this space. I think to this point around balance and doing things really, really well, who else, have you seen anything recently where you've just been like, they've absolutely nailed it, it's been really good?
I saw one this week actually, but I can't talk about it because it was copy advice. It's confidential, but it was another big business that had sent us some, I think, posters, or they might have been online ads, don't know. But a colleague of mine shared it with me because he said, look, here's a good example. We think the first 3 are okay and the last 2 aren't, but it's a good example of providing balance in a way that did not ruin the ads. On the contrary, actually, I think it made them better. Going to your point, consumers, they this kind of pictures of planets, and all this sort of stuff. They're not buying it. They really are not buying it. It kind of turns them off, and our research has shown that in the same way that yours has. So I think there's a need for everyone. This is not personal, obviously, to people in this room, but I think there's a need for UK advertising, and I'm sure it goes beyond that, to get better at storytelling and to be a bit more precise and just a bit more straightforward and honest about it. And I honestly think the ads will work better if businesses do that. There was another really nice example of, again, I can't go into the details of this, and this is more showing off copy advice actually, but I'll say it anyway. A member of my team was at a birthday party, their 5-year-old's birthday party, chatting to a friend who it turned out was in marketing and was working on a sustainability campaign for the business they work for, huge business. Catherine said, you need to send that to copy advice, and they did. And he then got back in touch with Catherine and said, that was the best decision I've ever made, delayed the campaign by a month and cost us 14 grand, but your team ripped our campaign to shreds, and what came out the other end was way better. That's the important thing, it was way better. What came out the other end was way better. And 14 grand, it cost them 14 grand because they sought copy advice late in the process, right? But even so, 14 grand is a drop in the ocean compared to the reputational damage and the actual direct cost of having to pull a campaign, or the reputational damage of being over the media because you're a big business and the ASA or the CMA or someone like that's come after you for making misleading green claims. So there's lots of businesses now thinking about this properly, I think, and I agree with you. I think we should see this as an opportunity. I do want people to worry about it a bit. I don't want them to lose sleep. I do want them to worry about it a bit, but I want them to see it as an opportunity to show off their storytelling chops. And honestly, I think their campaigns will work better as a result.
And that makes total sense. We've been at Climate Labs, we've been testing different ways that this messaging can kind of come across much better with more people. We've tested frames around jobs and skills, for example, around health, around actually connection with your local space and local community. And all of these things have actually performed really, really well in terms of actually kind of connecting with something that people genuinely love, genuinely believe, the connection they feel to their family, their space, their hope for the future, for example. And all of these ways, all of these things can be vehicles for communicating around this in a much more, I think, people-focused way that means that you don't have to rely on these kind of very slightly nebulous or kind of exaggerated. Slightly lazy, yes, absolutely. And I think what was so exciting, and I am a geek, I do get excited about green claims regulation, I'm sorry, is that there is a bit of, there is definitely a movement around this that goes much beyond the UK, and I'm sure lots of people in this room are looking at what's going on in the EU right now and in the US and kind of going, actually, how does this all fit together? So, for you, how does this, what you're doing in the UK actually chime with what's happening in the EU and the US and globally?
It chimes. The EU particularly got the Green Claims Directive that Jake talked about in production at the moment. It's pretty radical. It's at the moment, things may change, but at the moment it is penciling in no green claims unless you've had them independently verified. So kind of similar to the law we've got for nutrition and health claims. Whether that's wise is a different matter. There was huge backlogs when it came to nutrition and health claims, getting them approved, because it's a very slow scientific process, and I'm sure exactly the same thing will happen if this goes through. And that whole kind of slowness and bureaucracy could have a negative effect on businesses' willingness to invest in greener things because of the difficulties of them being able to communicate it. So there are some quite serious things, I think, to think about in the context of the Green Claims Directive, but typically for the EU, it's going in pretty hard. You've got France, which is very much in the vanguard of environmental law. You will know this, I'm sure. They ban single-use plastics, they ban some short-haul flights, advertising of fossil fuels, and a while, I don't know whether this is still happening now, but a while back people were talking about France as being a bit of an outlier. They're not an outlier. They're a window into our future. What's happening in France will be contemplated in the UK, probably not by this government, but it will be contemplated in the UK too. And so the direction of travel is definitely towards more legislation. We've got the situation in America where the US the FTC is reviewing its green claims guidance, which I think it last updated in 2012. So it's pretty old. So that's a process that's now underway as well, and there's a sort of sense that under Biden the US is sort of waking up to kind of environmental issues in a way that wasn't the case under Trump. So but the US is behind, and in terms of our leadership in this area, and Jake talked about this kindly said this in his intro. We definitely are leading the way on misleading by omission and the importance of adding balance, even though that concept is not novel. It's in our code, it's in the CMA's code, it's in the codes of all of the ASAs in other countries in Europe and around the world. They've all got stuff in there about misleading by omission, but of course it's how you apply that and the extent to which you apply that and the context in which you apply that matters.
And that's, again, really interesting, because I think what we're increasingly seeing, you've talked about the shifts and the behaviour changes that we have to make. We're legally bound to make, but also, there are big market shifts and new products coming out all the time that I'm sure people in this room are trying to think about how we transition people towards. And we're trying to do this, we're trying to make these changes against the backdrop of what Lord Putnam described as a tsunami of mis and disinformation. We see this with ACT. We look a lot at the conversations that are happening around kind of green issues, and we see that there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of there's some slightly malicious actors out there who are trying to do things like create culture wars out of kind of green shifts, and that's extremely concerning. So I think it is ever more important that brands, for example, and we know that consumers have confidence in brands around some of these issues, that actually brands tell the truth and kind of really kind of go, I suppose, use this kind of guidance constructively. So I guess everyone in here is probably going to be thinking, right, practically, because we all know there's a difference between theory and practice. Kind of what things can they walk away and do today as a result of kind of coming here and listening to this talk?
I mean, I'd think about, if you haven't already, you probably have, but I'd think about who in your organisation is going to be in charge of this, of maintaining, developing and maintaining their expertise on environmental regulation. I would explicitly identify someone to take the lead on that and make sure everything goes through them. And, you know, as I said, get up to speed on our guidance. Use copy advice. We've got a whole bunch of other advice and training resources that are available via our website. Most are free, not all are. We've got e-learning modules on environmental claims that you can put your teams through that you have to pay for, but they're not expensive. So there's a lot of stuff that we make available already. We will keep making it available. I would sign up to our newsletter, because that way you will hear from us rather than have to seek it out when new stuff happens, like important new rulings or updates to guidance and so on. So you can sign up to that on our website. It's very quick and easy to do.
Fantastic. I have to say, this is an area that we're getting a lot of questions around at Media Bounty. So a lot of our clients, this is on a lot of clients' minds. And you know, I think it's really what we're finding is because we've got this kind of expertise in-house, where we're finding that it's very useful to kind of actually the way that we can kind of cross-pollinate across consulting projects versus you know, kind of advertising projects. And I think I guess the conversations we're having tend to be quite, people are concerned, people want to get this right. We're having a lot of those conversations where, you know, kind of people are going, well, where's the space to play? And I do think for me, it's a case of, like, you know, knowing what the guardrails are, you know, kind of knowing what you can't do, knowing what the exaggeration point is, and then having fun in that space, using everything we know about marketing, using everything we know about consumer insights, about media, about, you know, kind of great creative storytelling, and defining that space. And I think if we do so, we're just going to have much better advertising. We're all going to feel a little bit less nervous about this, and I think it's going to be really good for consumers as well. I am going to give time for some questions, just to let everyone know. I'm sure there's some burning questions after what Guy said. But Guy, I think, you know, if we wanted everyone in this room to walk out and do one thing, and I know that the copy sounds like an excellent one, but, you know, kind of what one thing would you say that you could go out and say to your team, to your agency, or, you know, to the wider world?
Probably what I just said about, you know, sign up to our newsletter, because that's the best way of staying in touch. You then don't have to do anything, it kind of comes to you. We don't send it out very often, but you will then hear about the latest in this area and everything else. So I'd get your teams to do that. That way they'll get regular updates, so they can choose to read or not, depending on how busy they are. But they won't have to seek out the stuff that we're doing, so I'd probably say that. But look, I think your point about storytelling is really important, because that plays into the kind of that plays into something we haven't really talked about today, which is the social responsibility angle. That's how we think of it. So I'm not talking so much here about misleading green claims, even misleading by omission. I'm talking about the broader issue of advertising's contribution to unsustainable consumption. And that is being talked about at the moment, but mostly by campaign groups, not so much by the general public. That will change. That is going to become mainstream. That whole issue of advertising's contribution to unsustainable consumption, and from an opportunity point of view, advertising's positive contribution to helping to establish new norms around consumer behaviour that are better for the planet. And the big question is, net, what is advertising's contribution going to be in the short to mid-term? Is it going to be net negative or net positive? And we want it to be net positive. It's never going to be perfect, of course, but we want it to be net positive. We want to be able to make a persuasive case that advertising broadly is helping to change consumer behaviour for the better in this area. And so one of the things that we're thinking about, we're quite, you know, we haven't gone very far down this path, you might be happy to hear, but one of the things we're thinking a lot about at the moment is what's the ASA's role in that. You know, I can talk at events like this about this is coming down the road, and it plays into the point about legislation. If advertising doesn't get onto this and do it better and make a credible case that it's helping to change norms for the better, then it's going to be more likely that we're going to have prescriptive legislation that may not be good. I mean, it might be good, but it may not be good. You know, legislation has a bit of a habit of, you know, being a bit untargeted and sometimes a bit over the top, and sometimes difficult to work with. So, you know, we've got agency here. I think we collectively have agency here, but it's difficult because you know, you can't just identify one group of people to kind of deliver on that. You know, it's all of us. It's a bit of all of our jobs. It's got to be a bit of all of our thinking. We need to start thinking about this and talking about it.
I love that. So we did an event, I think a couple of months ago, with Seb London from AdNet Zero, and he said something really similar. Yeah, he talked about actually there's a huge role that advertising can play in this transition. So, you know, we've taken, for example, vegan milk or non-dairy milk from being something that was a niche product into being something that was you know, that is now consumed by most of us. We can do the same with electric vehicles. We can do the same with the other, you know, the circular economy. You know, the partnership between eBay and Love Island has been absolutely transformational in the way that, you know, we start to think about fashion. So we have the power to do this. We are literally, I can't remember who said that we're the architects of desire, but, you know, essentially that's what that's the role that we can play. And I know that, for example, that AdNet Zero Pillar 5, which supports this, feels like an area that we really need to kind of think about and explore, and really go for. So that sounds like quite a good way to kind of like transition us into questions, is this sense of we can do this. This guidance is going to really, really help us. We have an exciting new place to play. And I'd love to hear what burning questions you've all got, having heard us talk for almost 45 minutes. No pressure at all, by the way.
Gentleman here.
Shall we go?
Run around.
I'm Rob from Penguin Sustainability Startup. One of the things that has been reported by Patrick Greenfield in The Guardian is there might be more policy in this space, particularly around those sugary hits of claims like carbon neutral and natural and things that are hard to substantiate and usually bollocks. Is there more coming in that kind of world in terms of firming up or making it harder for people to make those kinds of lazy claims that don't really work?
Yeah, I think so. The government, one of the areas where the current government is active at the moment is looking into carbon neutral and net zero. So they're doing some work on that. We're working with them on that. It's quite early days, but they're looking at that, and I think that's not before time, because this is a personal view, but I've got quite big concerns, as some of you may have, over the way the offsetting market works at the moment. I think I've got this sort of feeling of emperor's new clothes about it, you know, that at some point everyone's going to wake up and go, well, that's not what we thought it was at all. Government has for a long time been looking at the green energy tariff market. It's taking ages. It's frustrating how long that review is taking, but that's another market that I don't think is working terribly well. So from a UK government perspective, those are two areas I think to watch. Natural, I'm not so sure about. The next phase for us is food. So we've looked into heating and energy, we've looked into transport, and claims like carbon neutral and net zero that run across all sectors. We're looking into waste at the moment, and then we will look into food, which is mostly meat and dairy.
On net zero itself, there's On net zero itself, is there going to be like a clear guidance on differences between scopes 1, 2 and 3? So we're at net zero for scopes 1 and 2, whiskey distillery, and we're not net zero for scope 3. We're working on that. Mm-hmm. And at the moment we can, because the, I can't remember who they are, the whiskey board, decide that you can call yourself net zero if it's only for the first 2 at the moment. But obviously that's not that clear for consumers, right? Because then we want to make sure that we say to them, we're not for scope 3, which is all in our future sustainability report, fine, but on an ad, that's obviously completely different, right? They don't even know what net zero is, half of them. Is there going to be like a clarity across the board amongst all businesses where it's, you have to be for 1, 2 and 3? Is that going to be something that comes?
That's the dream. That's the dream. I doubt it, if I'm honest. Because that's just not the way the world works. It doesn't work in the way we'd like it to sometimes. I think there will be more. I think it's likely that what will come out of this work by government, I don't know how soon, will be a code around carbon neutral and net zero, and that will provide useful non-legal definitions. Hopefully it'll be more in line with international practice rather than less in line with international practice. But in saying that, I'm implying there is this sort of, there's this consensus.
Like the calorie thing, do you mean?
No.
I'm trying to think what you mean by that.
Well, just definitions of, just simple definitions of carbon neutral and net zero. We don't have a single definition. And you make the point about scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. I mean, there's a perfect example of that. People are using these phrases in different ways because there isn't a kind of universal definition. I don't think we're going to end up with a definition in UK law. There may be in EU law, but I don't think we will in UK law. But we may end up with a kind of non-legislative code that provides us with more clarity than we've got at the moment about how we should be using those terms. The ASA shone a spotlight on consumer understanding of these terms, but we're not the people to tell everyone what that definition should be for obvious reasons. We're the ad regulator. So we will contribute to this because we've got some expertise and we've got opinions, but it's kind of in the hands of others, and don't have overly high expectations for what the UK will do in the near future.
Anybody else got a burning question? Yes.
Hi, thank you for explaining the EU side of things as well. We work with a lot of EU clients. Something I've heard from one of my team members is that within the EU, not all of the countries act the same on green claims codes, even though they have the same laws. I don't know if you have experience with that, or if that's something that you've
Yes. It's true. It's true, but it's not just true in this area, it's true everywhere. We've always, particularly when we were a part of it, we've always talked of the EU as being a common market, but and there is this sort of direction of travel towards more consistency. But there's a hell of a lot of inconsistency everywhere you look. Even with regulations, EU regulations apply directly in the countries. There's less wiggle room for individual countries to put them into their own law in a slightly different way. Directives get put into law by each country, but even with regulations which are supposed to ensure consistency, there's a lot of inconsistency, and that's just the way the world is, and it's true in this area of green claims too. Some countries are hot on it, some less hot, some allow things that others don't. That has always been the way of the EU world and the wider world too. It's true of supranational UN stuff, WHO stuff as well, etc. It's just the way it goes.
But in theory, it should be complying with the EU, right?
Yeah. But there's a gap between theory and practice. Yeah.
In the front. Hello. Firstly, thank you very much for the interesting discussion. Given the threat to public health that climate change and its effects are posing, I can't help but draw the parallel between high emissions advertising and that of cigarettes and tobacco. And I'm just wondering to what extent discussions are happening that might prohibit really high emitters, those practicing extractive methods, from actually advertising all their products.
Well, that's something that campaign groups in this area are calling for. It's something that's happened in France. I'm not aware of there being any discussions at policy level in the UK on that front at the moment. So, I mean, we're very clear when it comes to our regulation of advertising that we're operating in the context of what's lawful. It's not for us, for example, to decide that energy companies, extracting oil and gas, should be banned from advertising. That's a matter for government and Parliament. But are those discussions happening at the moment in the UK? I don't think they are. Do you think they should be?
Not for me to say.
They're also happening at UN level as well. So on a multilateral level, they're happening. It's a live conversation at UN level. So maybe watch this space. We shall see. Any other questions? In the back there? No? Oh, a couple more. Yeah.
Do you see companies going quiet in this space? Obviously, it's a growing space. People want to talk about their credentials. But personally, at work sometimes, I find it easy to say, let's not put that out there, let's not go down that route, because of trying to hit, and have all the backup, the regulations, the validation. Yep. Do you see that, or is it just a growing area where people are going to continue to go into it?
That's a really good question. People are talking about that a lot at the moment. They are saying, and I touched on this earlier, they're saying that our recent rulings are going to have a chilling effect on not just advertising about more sustainable stuff, but investment in more sustainable stuff, because if you can't talk about it and tell the public about it, what's the point in investing in it? To which the answer is, well, because it helps the planet. But anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of talk about it. I don't know whether it's happening. I hope it's not. I really hope it's not. I want businesses to be investing in more environmentally friendly initiatives. It's really, really important that they do that, and it's really important that they feel able to tell people about that. Our involvement is in how they're doing that, and whether they're doing it in a way that's not misleading and socially irresponsible. And obviously, we can understand why people are a bit worried at the moment or anxious that they might get it wrong, because we're in a period of our history where we are putting a huge focus on this area at the moment. So there's a lot of stuff coming out of the ASA at the moment that might send the signal that this is a scary place to play. But I mean, I really hope that businesses don't decide not to talk about the greener stuff that they're doing, because I think it's really important that you do. And I think it goes back to the stuff that Harriet was talking about how you do it and how you think about it, and what's your strategy, and just really keep that focus on storytelling, and remember the kind of big eco-friendly, environmentally friendly claims that are most dangerous because they're absolute and they're almost impossible to prove. They're a turn-off for most people. People see through them. They just smell bullshit when they see those sorts of claims. So feel good about the fact that you're playing in a more qualified kind of area and more specific, because that's going to probably get more cutthroat anyway. It's going to be believed more by people that notice your ads.
There's a question over here, I think.
Sorry, please forgive me having two goes. I was almost following on that. The precision point seemed really interesting to me. What I noted about the Anglian ruling, but also another water company on the same day not being found against. So they both appear to be advertising roughly the same thing, an investment outside of their value chain. They both have the same problem with sewage. One ad seemed precise enough to pass your test and another didn't. So
they didn't have the same problem with sewage. That's why the decisions were different. So with Anglia Water, their record, their environmental record in terms of things like sewage overflow and stuff like that was not great. 2 stars out of 4, I think. That might be wrong. 2 stars out of 5, something like that. Severn Trent, which was the other company that we ruled against on the same day, not upholding the complaints against their ads. They had sort of equal best record of all water companies in the UK. I think it was 4 stars out of 5. They'd have had 5 out of 5 if they'd had 3 significant sewage incidents in the previous year, rather than the 4 that they actually had. They had one sewage incident. They were kind of 1 sewage incident away from having the kind of top mark. And as I said, they were kind of best in class at the moment. And we felt that meant that they didn't have to provide the balance in their campaign that Anglia did because of their poorer record.
It's not every day you hear somebody say 1 sewage incident away from the top mark. Any other questions? Yeah, there's one. I'll run around. Hold on.
I don't know if this comes within the ASA, but is there any guidance around target setting? So, for example, we've set a target for being nature positive by 2024, but it's quite hard to actually explain what that is and like how we're doing it, and if we don't achieve it, is there any kind of guidance on how we can say why we haven't achieved it and what we should be doing to kind of explain about those kind of targets that are being set that aren't exactly easy to prove or quantify?
Gosh. I mean, I think there's a bunch of them. There's a market in this sort of stuff, but may I say, I think you've got a problem with nature positive. I would say you're never going to achieve that. So I think you're giving yourself a problem right from the start with the way you're framing your target, your ambition. So I would try and make it something more realistic and achievable. And then I suspect you'll find that the measurement will follow. Certainly will follow more easily. I mean, nature positive. I don't know what sort of company you work for. Who do you want to say who you work for? You don't have to.
Yeah, I guess travel company.
Travel company.
Yeah.
Does it involve people flying in planes? Okay.
Yeah, so that's the thing. That's the conundrum. But I just wondered if that's something that could be considered greenwashing, is if we're setting these targets and we're not achieving them. And
yeah, I mean, if you ran a campaign talking about being nature positive, you'd be in trouble.
Right,
So I'd be really careful with that, but particularly because of the nature of the business. I mean, flying is for almost all of us, the flights we take are the biggest contribution to our carbon footprint.
Right, on that note, I'm going to sort of draw it to a close. We've had a brilliant conversation, and thank you all for your questions. A couple of things, I guess, to pick up on. Guy, you said that there's a window to the future in what, say, France are doing, and certainly, again, some of the stuff that we're seeing coming out of the United Nations and what's happening in the future, and making sustainable consumption mainstream. Obviously, the purpose disruptors are doing quite a lot of work in advertised emissions. So what is the contribution of our advertising to emissions? So I think businesses need certainty in order to plan and to make strategies. If there's one thing that's bloody certain, it is climate. We're not going to be in a room like this in 2 years' time and go, remember that climate crisis? Glad we sorted that out. So, you have an opportunity to plan properly and actually aligned to certainty for the business. The advice on having a person as a leader in environmental regulation I thought was brilliant. Somebody needs to take responsibility to stay on top of this stuff because it's coming out all the time, regularly, not just from the ASA. Obviously, we talked about the Green Claims Directive in the EU and beyond. Read the guidance, get up on this, become an expert on this, and obviously Guy talked about the ASA copy advice, which can obviously help you 24 hours and also save you a great deal of money. But also it's such a creative opportunity, this. You know, some of the worst briefs are an open brief. You can do anything. What? Anything? Well, I don't know where to start. You know, creativity often needs guardrails in order to sometimes come up with the best ideas. And that question about, you know, that green hushing, I think we also need to be respectful of our audience. Our audience wants us to tell them the truth. I think for too long, a lot of these terms have been, as Guy said, bullshit. And we're trying to confuse and bamboozle our audiences. For example, ISBA and the Advertising Association have done a lot of work on trust. Well, I think this is another massive contributing factor, that we're trying to bamboozle our audience. If we just tell them the truth and be straight with them, they expect businesses to be taking this seriously, but they also expect businesses to be, you know, going on a journey. They expect businesses not to be perfect and advertisers not to be perfect. So I think there's a huge opportunity here to actually reconnect with these audiences, you know, that Harriet was talking about. Our Persuadables research, have a look at it. It's called Beyond the Climate Bubble. It's on the Media Bounty website. So have a look at that, that piece of research where, again, we found that, you know, people are not connecting with these sorts of terms and are not trusting these sorts of terms. But, you know, if you go and talk to them where they are on what they care about, you know, and do it authentically and truthfully, then there's a huge opportunity. So, you know, most businesses are either massively committed to net zero and have a huge opportunity, or are on the journey to do so, also have an opportunity. I don't think there's many that are publicly stating that they don't give a monkeys. I mean, Shell has just come out and said we're going to continue to do oil and gas exploration and return loads of money to our shareholders. So, you know, but there's few and far between, right? So there is a massive creative opportunity here, and this sort of guidance is giving us the right sort of guardrails to really take advantage of that. Thank you all very much for coming. There are, you know, pastries